be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The bill is set down for third reading immediately. Honourable Chris Bishop.
Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I move that the Resource Management, Natural and Built Environment, Spatial Planning Repeal and Interim Fast-Track Consenting Bill be now read a third time. I want to start by just saying thank you to members from all sides of the House, actually, for the constructive way in which we went through the Select Committee, no Select Committee on this one, the Committee of the Whole. Sorry, it's been a tiring 3 or 4 weeks. In fact, it's been a tiring year, Madam Assistant Speaker. But I want to thank all the members, and I think that was a constructive way through. Look, all of the issues have been well canvassed, I think, in the last first and second reading in the Committee of the Whole House. The government remains committed to sensible changes to our planning regime that makes it easier to get houses built, get aquaculture underway, gets infrastructure built, whilst protecting the environment. I think there is a widespread consensus that that is not the case at the moment. The replacement regime that we are repealing today, the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, was a well-intentioned but unfortunate and misguided attempt at fixing our planning regime, and many people consider it would not have worked. The Select Committee heard submission after submission from people that said exactly that, from local councils, from developers, from infrastructure, from renewable energy providers. And I know that the member who's the Labour Party Environment spokesperson, who I like a lot and I have a lot of time for, but she needs to be aware of her conflict, because Honourable Rachel Brooking was a member of the Randerson panel that begat this nonsense. And so it's fair enough that she's, now in the position she's in. She became the Associate Minister for the Environment, but she was a member of the Randerson panel, so she's not like she, to use an equity term, does not come at this with clean hands, Madam Speaker. And I don't say that in a particularly pejorative way, but no. I was just making a law joke. Chris Pink found it funny, even if others didn't. Well, hey, listen, the government's accepted an amendment to the legislation on the floor of the House. I thought we'd get more joie de vivre from the opposition, but anyway, Christmas spirit and Christmas joy. I'm proud of this legislation. I'm not proud that we had to do it under urgency. I'm not proud we had to do. Well, yeah, I am. I'm proud of all the stuff we're repealing. Because as I've said multiple times, including in the public, when something is not a good piece of legislation, by definition, repealing it is good. Because if it was good, it would stay in the statute book. So the members opposite have this quite odd attitude that everything government must do has to be constructive. That we have to pass these elaborate pieces of legislation, and if repealing something which is destructive by definition actually is positive in the sense that it will grow the economy and make it easier to do things, by definition that is constructive. So that's my point, is that the binary is a false one. Repealing things can take the country forward. To take an example that the Labour Party members opposite might have some sympathy for, the Labour Party spent most of the 1990s saying the Employment Contracts Act was a disaster. They then repealed the Employment Contracts Act, and the Labour Party back then didn't go around and say, "Oh, well, we're repealing it. Oh, no, this is not good." They were proud of the repeal. So that's what governments do. Governments change, the political cycle goes, things come and go. We came to government with a mandate to go through systematically and repeal stupid pieces of legislation passed by the last Parliament, by the last government, and that is what we're doing. We had fair pay last week, 90-day trials once we get through this. We've got the RMA, we've got the clean car/ute tax, and trust me, there's more coming in the new year. So I'm looking forward to it. And getting stuff off the statute books is by definition positive, right? If it reduces the size of government and takes the country forward. If the Parliament legislates too much stuff, and one of the problems with the last government was they would just legislate it all the time. Elaborate, complicated, complex regimes that stuff the statute books with complexity. Actually, we need a smaller government that reduces down the size of the statute books. So anyway, I somewhat digress, Madam Speaker. Megan would say she's looking forward to it. So as I sort of advertised, we're keeping the fast-track consenting regime, which was developed by the last government. We're developing our own regime. Work is underway on that at pace, and Simon Court, my Undersecretary for Infrastructure and RMA Reform, is working on that alongside our coalition government parties. We are interested, as I've said to the member Rachel Brooking, interested in spatial planning and how we get that more properly equipped. I've kept the Spatial Planning Board, or we've decided to keep the Spatial Planning Board, and we'll work through the roles and functionality of that in due course. I do agree with the member, the point she made at various points, that spatial planning does have a real role to play, but I think it is really important, as I said during the committee stage, we do that in a coherent and structured way that sits alongside other government priorities, alongside water reform, and at some point in due course we will have to consider the future of local government reform as well, and of course it sits alongside our reforms to infrastructure funding and financing, which, as the member knows, and the member sitting next to her knows, is fundamental to getting more houses built in New Zealand. I think of it as the housing challenge is like a trifecta. You've got to get the land use stuff good, you've got to get land use policy done in a comprehensive way, you've got to get competitive urban land markets, you've got to get the housing, the infrastructure funding and financing arrangements right, and you've got to get the council incentives lined up so that councils don't just see growth as something to be ambivalent about or frankly many times hostile to. They've got to see growth as something that's a good thing, because housing growth is in all of our interests, not least of which the government, and in 20 or so minutes the Minister of Finance will present the mini-budget and the haifu, and I'm not breaking any budget secrets when I say that the government spends an enormous sum of money every year on housing subsidies, around $4 billion a year, once you add up income-related rent, accommodation supplement, and the tragedy that is emergency housing, and in due course we will have to do what we can to sort that out. So our planning laws affect almost every aspect of our lives, and it is really important that we get them right, and I acknowledge the contribution from Rachel Brooking, the letter, which I will ponder and consider over the summer break, and we'll come back to her around our shared desire to create a better New Zealand and a better planning regime. But for now, we have come to the view that the regime put in place by the last government would have been a retrograde step. We sought at the election a mandate to get it off the statute books. I regret the use of urgency. I'm not a fan of urgency in a general sense, but I think it is justified in this case because there's a 10-year transition window, and if we hadn't got off the statute books by Christmas, people would spend an enormous amount of time and money over the Christmas period and the New Year spending time and money on a regime that was, Parliament, or at least the government, made clear wasn't going to exist at some point in the future. So it's better just to get it off the books now, start again, and that's what we're going to do, and that's what the government is seeking a mandate for from the Parliament. And with that, thank you very much, Madam Assistant Speaker.
I call the Honourable Julianne Genter.
Tēnā koe, Madam Speaker. Tēnā koutou e te whare. We have so many opportunities to do things better. We have so many opportunities in Aotearoa to live more in harmony with nature, to use energy more efficiently, to produce more green, fully renewable electricity that is low cost, and to ensure that our towns and cities are places where people love to live, where our children have the freedom to get around under their own steam, to get to school by walking or cycling or scooting if that's what they wish. That benefits everyone. They could have the freedom to do this, but it requires doing things differently. And for many decades, we had harmful planning rules that came in after the Town and Country Planning Act that made it more difficult for our kids to walk and cycle to school. So over the last 30 to 40 years, kids stopped walking and cycling to school. Parents rightly are concerned about the safety of their kids when there's fast-moving vehicles, larger vehicles, big SUVs and utes. And then when parents have to drive their kids everywhere, that actually reduces the freedom and independence that kids have, but it also makes traffic worse. It makes our transport costs higher. It's not just pollution. I mean, people do have a right to live free from pollution. It's not just climate change that's the issue. Fundamentally, our transport system is inefficient and it limits the freedom and ability of people to move around. And we have the ability and the responsibility to do the right thing, to do things better. Our planning rules aren't just around urban development. That's my big focus, the opportunity to do urban development better. It's also about environmental bottom lines. And I've had many colleagues speak in this debate on this bill during the committee stages and during the prior stages of this debate. Lan Pham, a freshwater ecologist and two-term regional councillor who spoke to the absolute passion communities have had and the evidence that supports it with over 50 experts to have clean water. We could have clean, healthy water, and we don't have it now. My colleague Steve Abel talking about tree protection. Urban trees make so much sense. They reduce the pressure on our reticulated water system. They make our towns and cities healthier, happier places to be. They're just so vitally important. But if we don't have blanket tree protection, then what happens is we lose that tree cover. And with it, we lose, the water management that it brings. We lose the native birds. We lose the shade and the climate control. We lose all of that. And so that's why tree protection is so important. Scott Willis, who for many years worked in renewable electricity and tried to get a community wind farm up and faced the barriers under the old planning regime to getting renewable electricity up at a community scale. So the Green Party is full of people who have been passionately working to solve some of these problems, to deliver better outcomes for the community, and to be responsible. And the legislation that's being repealed today, Madam Speaker, it wasn't perfect, but it went through an incredibly thorough process with two select committees. And the second one attracted 3,000 submissions. Now, I heard the minister, I asked questions of the minister during the committee stages, and I said to the minister, what experts said that this NBEA, the Natural and Built Environment Act, and the Spatial Planning Act, who says that it's worse than going back to the RMA? And he couldn't name a single person. He referred to the select committee process where there were literally thousands of submissions. And one of the most disturbing things to me, I think, was that he didn't seem to understand that when people came to the select committee process and raised their issues, that then the government responded and there were further stages of the bill before it was passed through to an act. And I spoke to some of the people who were concerned about things that were in the bill at select committee, like Manawa Energy, like people who were concerned about Te Manawa Te Wai. Well, the government actually responded to all of those concerns. And so the final act didn't represent what was at the select committee. And so all of this really just exposes how shallow the people in the new government is, how shallow their knowledge is, how poor their respect is for the democratic process. And that they went out there, didn't pay much attention to what was actually happening or any constructive improvements to it. Instead, they mindlessly opposed in opposition everything the government was doing. And they have no clue. The minister doesn't even understand the difference between the Spatial Planning Act and the Natural and Built Environment Act. He's repealing both of them, even though the Spatial Planning Act is fundamentally a different piece of legislation that was making improvements, but he doesn't know because he didn't do the work in opposition. All they did was shallowly oppose everything in a bid to get more votes, in a bid to get into government. But I think the people of New Zealand would have reasonably expected the people elected to government to take a fulsome approach, a robust approach, and not to throw everything out when a bunch of it was actually really useful. A bunch of it was actually useful. So here we are. The one thing being kept is fast-track consenting. Now, that's not really a surprise. So the truth is that the current people who are in government, who found themselves in a position of responsibility, are not going to exercise that responsibility on behalf of all the people of New Zealand and our future generations or our environment. Oh, no, no, no. They are here to represent the existing power structure, the people who are currently have all the money and power, and they're going to maintain that and make sure they can make more money, that they can continue to exploit workers and our environment. However, now I don't doubt there are some people sitting over there who don't realize that that's what their government is doing, that they truly think they believe in efficiency and better outcomes and good value for money and protecting the environment in a responsible way. But when you look, Madam Speaker, at the reality of what is in this bill, there was an alternative scenario. The Minister, Chris could have not rushed through urgency to repeal 6 years of work, where thousands of people submitted, where we spent $250 million getting the advice and getting the work to come up with a new system. We could see how it was working and make adjustments to it. But instead, they've decided to repeal it all within 2-3 weeks of Parliament starting, throw out all of that effort. Personally, Madam Speaker, I hate waste. And what breaks my heart is coming to this House and seeing the wasted time and effort that could have gone into good legislation that could have produced better outcomes for our people, for our planet. And the current government throws it all away because they haven't bothered to try and understand. They don't actually believe in democracy. They're here to preserve the existing power structure. The people with the most power and money want to keep on exploiting the environment, want to keep on exploiting workers, and it suits those people. Now, they need to think long and hard. If you came to this place because you truly believe in solutions, how do you feel, Madam Speaker, not you, but the people sitting opposite, how do they feel about watching such a shoddy approach to lawmaking, to watching $250 million of taxpayers' resources, of public resources being wasted and thrown down the drain? And how do they feel? How do they feel about knowing that over 50% of our freshwater waterways are at threat? What is their answer? What is their constructive solution? Why are they delaying the clear national direction that is needed for regional councils to be able to bring in the rules that will actually protect our fresh waterways now and into the future? Because if we don't act very soon, extinction is forever. Extinction is forever. And the members opposite clearly believe that they're in the born to rule class, that they're the responsible ones, that they're somehow going to come up with solutions that are going to look after not just the people who are currently the most powerful, but the long-term benefit of our natural environment. Because what is happening today is a mindless oppositional repeal from a minister who's not across the detail, who doesn't actually know what's being repealed, and who's going to have to start over the work from scratch. But what they are going to do, Madam Speaker, and I have no doubt about this, and people watching at home need to know this, is they're going to use this fast-track consenting to ride roughshod over environmental bottom lines and communities, to help vested interests achieve the things they want, the outcomes they want. And ultimately, it's all about preserving the status quo, doing more of what we already know. And, you know, the definition of insanity, we've heard it many times, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. When it comes to protecting our natural environment, when it comes to future-proofing climate-resilient communities and building cities that welcome in nature, that work with nature, that enable freedom and a future for our children, the current national New Zealand First Act government has no vision, they have no ideas, and they're going to be here to maintain the status quo in the existing power structure, and the Green Party will continue putting up positive solutions. This bill is not one.
I call Simon Court.
The ACT Party is proud to support the repeal of the Natural and Built Environments Act and the Spatial Planning Act, and the maintenance of a fast-track opportunity for businesses, organisations that want to get a consent and start building things that produce value. Because unless we do that in New Zealand, we will continue the economic and social decline that the previous Labor government perpetuated. And there's nothing that signals more clearly the confusion between the need for economic and social growth and environmental protection, the failure to identify a suitable balance, than the acts we're repealing here today. It's true that resource management reform is long overdue and much delayed. In the early 1990s, I studied resource management law. I proposed to a lecturer that a property development model consent conditions would fly through a hearing, and that my development would be given a tick by the commissioners, and that my contractors will be able to start work within a few short weeks. Well, my lecturer told me back in the 1990s, that's not how it works, Sonny Jim. You'll just have to spend a bit more time spending money on resource management lawyers and arguing with commissioners about consent conditions. But it turns out all the things that we've learned how to do well, whether it's erosion and sediment control, whether it's identifying where threatened bat species are roosting in trees and when's the best time to fell the trees because the bats have moved on, we know all that information. We don't need the Natural and Built Environments Act or the Spatial Planning Act to send us back 30 years to have a bit of a navel-gazing exercise for further decades on how to resolve the conflict between developing land, economic growth and environmental protection. Now, I've heard from some members of the opposition that because the former Minister David Parker spent $250 million in developing the Natural and Built Environments and Spatial Planning Acts, that we should just let it go, and we should just accept that. Well, the ACT Party does not believe in the sunk cost fallacy that has led to the sinking of the Inter-Islander proposal, and will no doubt lead to the sinking of many more Labor sunk cost fallacies. Time to pull the handbrake on. Let's turn this four-wheel drive New Zealand around. Now, I want to describe what a future resource management reform might look like. There was a gentleman who participated in founding one of the world's modern and greatest states, George Washington. He said that freedom and property rights are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. Freedom to build means reducing the number of people who can object to the things you want to build, whether you're a land developer, whether you're a public asset owner, or whether you're somebody who just wants to build a distribution warehouse so that your goods can find their way to customers and not have to argue about the colour of it or whether it sticks up a little bit higher than your neighbour's building. We need to focus on trade-offs. Land development, economic development, lead to social development and social uplift. Protecting things just for the sake of it, or because some members of this House, some political parties believe we can return to some kind of year zero pre-human environmental state, completely unrealistic. Future resource management reform must focus on the benefits of development while protecting the places that New Zealanders value and regard as special. And that is what this coalition government will be bringing in 2024. ACT supports this bill, commended to the House. Let's go, New Zealand.